All right, we are live on the Extraordinary Sports YouTube channel and podcast. We are with a very special guest, Jay Posner, the sports editor of the sports section in the San Diego Union Tribune, joining us to talk about his career. Jay, thanks so much for joining me. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Appreciate the time. So obviously, you've been around the block in the sports world. You've been an editor. You've been a reporter, a writer, among others. When you first got into the world over 30 years ago, what initially attracted it to you, and where did you first start out?
Yeah, I'm really dating myself when I hear over 30 years ago, but I guess I got to own it because it happened, and the birth certificate doesn't lie. I've always loved sports. I wanted to be involved somehow. I learned pretty early on it wasn't going to be as an athlete. So I looked into broadcasting. Vin Scully was and remains my sports hero, if we could still use such a word like that. But I always enjoyed writing as well, and I thought that everything I heard about the broadcast business was that it was extremely volatile, and really hard to get started. And I just felt like I didn't want to do that. Like I said, I really enjoyed the writing, so I wrote for the college newspaper at UCLA 4 years, and then when I got out of school, I moved back down to San Diego and was lucky enough to get hired at one of the suburban papers that existed at the time. Unfortunately, we don't have too many of those anymore, but the Escondido Times-Advocate, I worked there for about 5 years and did all kinds of things. I worked as a copy editor, headline writer, reporter, did a lot of stories, ended up covering the Chargers, and so I was able to cover the Super Bowl the first time it was in San Diego.
It's awesome.
For that paper. So that kind of stuff. And then I got hired at the San Diego Tribune in 1989.
And you've been there pretty much ever since, minus a small stint in the arts and entertainment world, correct?
Yeah, I've been at the paper for that entire time, just over 28 years now. And again, worked as both a copy editor and a writer for a long time. I couldn't even list all the sports that I've covered here. Baseball, basketball, football, golf, a lot of horse racing. I'm sure a bunch, like I said, others that I know I'm forgetting. Mostly Chargers, mostly horse racing in the early part of the 90s, and then mostly Chargers from 97 through 07. And then I became an assistant sports editor right at the time the U.S. Open was here in 2008.
Fantastic.
And did that for a couple of years, sports editor for a couple of years, out of sports for a few years, and now back in sports for about 11 months now.
There it is. Well, as a San Diego born and raised native, excited to have you back at the head of the helm. So obviously, Jay, when we're talking about sports writing, sports journalism, it's a very interesting craft. You obviously have to report, but you also have your opinion. People love, obviously, sports personality opinions, whether it be the spoken word, the written word. When you're writing a piece, whether it be now or a few years ago, what have you, what do you try to focus on making sure you hit every time you are curating a piece?
I think you need to have an idea of what you're trying to say, what the story is.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody even suggested once that, most writers don't write their own headlines, although we do it a little more now because of the internet. And sometimes writers will put their own headlines on internet pieces. They don't do it. And occasionally we'll try to transfer that over to print, but it doesn't always work for space reasons. But
right.
I think, part of it is write a headline. What am I trying to say here? What's the story? And then get into it that way. I mean, you have to be careful. I mean, there's stories that can have opinion in them, like columns or maybe analytical pieces. There's stories that, we don't want to have opinion in.
Right.
Even these days where things change, there's kind of a blurring of the lines a little bit there, but we do try to keep a straight line there between fact and opinion, and encourage the writers when they're writing news stories or game stories to keep your opinions out of it and just tell us what happened. But I think, I think that in terms of a story, you need to tell people a story. Why is this important? Why am I writing about this person? Why am I writing about this subject? Because the reader's asking, why am I reading about this? And
right.
then you need to have an answer for them.
That's well said. And you obviously have an incredible staff between Kevin Acey, Nick Canepa, among others. So obviously you being in a leadership position, the leadership, coaching, whatever you want to call it, obviously is instrumental with getting the most out of your staff. Obviously, very talented group. Do you have any formula, if you will, for getting the most out of your staff on a week in, day out basis? Or do you go about it with each personality being different? What is your kind of coaching or overseeing strategy?
It's funny, when I got this job originally, the sports editor job in the summer of 2010, I remember at the first staff meeting that I had, one of the writers said, "Are you going to have any rules?" and I thought for a minute, and because I hadn't really considered it, and I said, "All right, we'll have one rule: don't do stupid stuff." And that's pretty much it. As far as for the most part, the guys who work for me are all veterans, almost all veterans. They've been around, they've done a lot of stuff, and I really try to stay out of their way as much as possible. I guess if you were, to use one of those sports cliches about a player's manager, I would consider myself to be a writer's editor.
That's awesome.
They have a lot of freedom in terms of what they write about, but that doesn't mean I can't. I like to do what we term here, at least pre-editing, where we do some conversations before the story about, all right, what are you writing about? What are you going to do? And then either ask some questions or offer some input, that sort of thing. But, for the most part, I think the people that work here know what they're doing. And I think a lot of, I trust them when they're out in the field to find the right story and come up with it. But at the same time, someone like Mark Ziegler, who's as good a writer as I've ever seen, right. We talk quite a bit about what he's writing about, and he'll ask my opinion on some things, and I'll make some suggestions, and some of them get used and some of them don't, and I might make a suggestion and Mark will say, well, what if I do this? And I like to think that I have pretty open communication with all the people that work for me, and it's definitely not a one-way street at all. I would never want that.
What would you say the most rewarding part of your position is as sports editor?
I think seeing the thing that I missed when I wasn't in sports, in addition to just being around being able to have input into sports, which is something I've always had a passion about, was really the reward of seeing your work each and every day. And whether that's just in the newspaper, which is kind of the old school way of look, here's a daily snapshot of what was happening on a specific day,
right?
And here's what we thought was important. Here's what the news was, and now there's instant gratification of seeing a story, go up online right away and have people read it and react to it and know that we. Know that we maybe struck a nerve or at least told people something they didn't know. So I think there's a lot of that in terms of reward.
It's fantastic. And obviously, the game has changed or matured, if you will, since you first started out with the emergence of the internet. Obviously, San Diego Union Tribune, incredible publication. You guys are clearly keeping up with the times. You got video content as well. What is your overall takeaway on kind of the newspaper art form working its way into the obviously internet, and then where do you see it going here in the next decade?
Well, I wish I knew. I mean, it's it's kind of a tough situation now, and the Chargers have been a big part of the major part of our coverage, both online and in print for forever and ever, and especially when the Padres haven't been very good. I mean, people really respond to the Charger coverage. And so we're kind of at a crossroads here in terms of how much more do we continue to cover the Chargers.
Right.
What I've told people so far is, we're not going to cover them as much as we covered them in the past, but we're certainly not going to ignore them either, because I think there's still going to be people who are interested in what happens with them, even on a hate basis, like reading about the Chargers to revel in mistakes that they make or games that they lose or things like that. But it's definitely caused a lot of discussion and thought about where do we go from here.
Well, I listened to your interview with Kevin Acee just a couple of days ago. Obviously, you guys touching on that, and obviously it's a unique period in your guys' world. But I liked the optimism that both of you kind of saw eye to eye with, that you maybe won't be as tied down to touching on just the Chargers. It may open up other avenues to talk about all teams in the NFL. I know me, for one, I'm tuning into the Union Tribune paper, not just for the Chargers. I like to get my around the league news. So I did like that. I mean, is there some obviously optimism with, one door closes, another opens type deal?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the optimistic glass half full type thing, sure. I would love to have that happen, and love for just as many people to be interested in everything else that we're going to write about as they were in the Chargers. The glass half empty part of me, which usually dominates, is more afraid of people, people tuning us out a little bit. But, it's a challenge, but we're going to have to come up with stories that people want to read, whether it's about the NFL or the Goals or the Aztecs or high schools or other colleges or whatever might be going on. But we're certainly not going to stop covering the NFL. I mean, it's the biggest sport in the country. It's certainly the biggest sport in the city. I think that's still the way that it goes. And I think we need to continue to let people know that they can come to our paper and find out what's happening in the entire league, as opposed to just with the Chargers. But as I said, we're not going to ignore the Chargers, and hopefully the Padres, they seem to be on the right track now. I think they're still probably 2 years away from really being competitive, but the optimism would be that, hey, people want to follow these young kids and be on the ground floor as they build the team up a little bit, and so we'll have plenty of coverage of them as well.
Have you been in a more interesting period in your time covering San Diego sports than right now?
No, I don't think anybody has. I mean, maybe when the Chargers got here, but even then, and I wasn't around then, but even then there wasn't anything else. So it was an easy decision. Hey, we're going to cover the Chargers now. Right. What else are you going to do? But now it's at the other end where you're losing, a big part of the fabric of not just the sports community, but the entire community. And so it's definitely challenging and interesting. And it's a time that, almost none of us have lived through. I mean, if you were born 56 years ago or whatever it is, the Chargers have been part of your life the entire time, as long as you've been aware of it. So, we'll have to harken back a little bit to the 50s when there was nothing here, and we'll see what we come up with.
Absolutely. Well, obviously the move is shocking. I don't know if you saw, only 5 people showed up to the LA Chargers welcome, if you will, at the Forum. 5 people. At first it was 0, then it went to 5. A very interesting piece. Bill Simmons, writer Justin Halper, wrote on The Ringer, and just to quote him, he said the Chargers are about to experience what it's like to move to LA and have no one, I'll spare the curse word, care about you. Yeah. Obviously, San Diego, I'm born and raised there. You've been there. It's a very unique town. You call it a beach city, but obviously we love our sports, loved our Chargers. Do you think it's going to be not only a culture shock for top to bottom with the Chargers organization, but a completely night and day experience, day in, day out for them moving forward up here?
I think somewhat, but I read the Justin Halpern piece and I laughed, through most of it. Yeah. And I agree with a lot of it, but I still think there's something about the NFL, and I think if the Chargers are good, and I think they have a chance to be good over the next couple of years, if the Chargers are good, I think people will pay attention to them. Now, are they going to pay attention to the tune of 80,000 people a game? I mean, even if they could sell that many seats, of course not.
No.
Are they going to be good where people treat them like the Dodgers and the Lakers and UFC football? I don't ever see that happening.
Mm-mm.
But I do think that if a team in LA is good, I think people will pay attention to it. But I do think they're up against, some big obstacles in terms of finding their place in the market. They were the team here, and we devoted, almost 3 full-time positions to covering them, if you count, our 2 beat writers plus Kevin Acey, who probably writes 80% of his columns about the Chargers. So,
right.
In LA, they're going to have one person on each paper covering them, and the occasional columnist or something. So I think they're going to be up against some exposure issues and kind of avoid getting lost in the crowd. The only way to succeed is to be good. But if they are good, there's some personalities, Phillip Rivers, Joey Bosa, Melvin Gordon, Jason Verrett, Keenan Allen. I mean, there's some names that could be well known out there if the team is good. So I don't think it's a completely hopeless situation for them, but they better be good quick, because otherwise they're really going to get lost.
I agree. Well, I mean, on the bright side, I guess moving ahead as a San Diego resident, we're the 8th largest city in the nation by population, 28th largest TV market. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, every team since '84, with the Baltimore Colts leaving, has gotten a team back to their city. So would you say, maybe not, in the next 3 years, but maybe the next 10, are you optimistic that an NFL franchise will come back?
No, I wouldn't turn myself optimistic about it. It's every team or every city except obviously St. Louis this last time. But
right.
But St. Louis did get one back. But anyway, I think I have a hard time being optimistic, only from the standpoint of how long the Chargers were trying to get a stadium. Now, trying is a verb that will be, we can all have a different opinion of how hard they tried, but I mean, they did have their hand out for a long time trying to find some place for someone to build them a stadium, if nothing else. But things don't get done here very, very, very quickly or at all. And
right.
So what keeps me from being optimistic is the idea that is anything going to get built here. And I'm not sure there's a team that's in play at this point. I mean, if the Raiders get approved to go to Las Vegas, I mean, that takes them out of the market. And people have talked about Jacksonville, but I don't see that Jacksonville's eager to leave. They seem to be doing better there. Their owners put a lot of money into that city. So I'm not sure that there's a way for a team to come back. Certainly there's no place to play right now. I'd love to see a major arena get built here. I mean, I'd love to see a stadium get built, whether it's for the NFL in the Aztecs or for a soccer team in the Aztecs. I'd love to see an arena get built here, even if it wasn't for NBA or NHL, just so we had a big-time arena for big-time concerts and big-time events and things like that. I mean, the sports arena, could stand to be replaced, and we could have said that 20 years ago. So I would love to see those things happen. It's just optimistic. I can't go that far. Yeah.
Well, bringing it back to overall craft of sports writing, reporting, now obviously there's a ton of different opinions out there. One could say less reporting and more opinions. Do you think that has hurt the written word at all in the area of sports, or do you think that it's opened up other avenues for more personalities and different pieces of content to land?
Probably a little of both. I mean, I think the extra personality and bringing that into it has helped. I think, but this whole kind of hot take mentality, trying to get yourself noticed, hasn't helped anybody.
Right.
And that applies in all walks of life and everything, in terms of media that covers politics or sports or just about anything else. I mean, it's this thing where you've got to kind of say something to get noticed. I don't think that helps anybody. But I think it's good for some of the people to be known a little bit for their personality. But I think most people would rather be known for their work. And I think that if it takes away from being factual and having integrity, I think that's the danger. We can't allow that to happen. And sadly, it already has in some areas.
Yeah, well, at least from your publication, it doesn't seem like, if anything, you guys have gotten stronger and better since, these other blogs and whatnot have come about. Is there low-hanging fruit or temptation to write the clickbait article or the article that's going to get the most clicks as opposed to something of substance, or you pretty much have a very set formula for the kind of content you guys are producing?
No, there's certainly temptation. But I don't think we want to be in a position where we're just offering clickbait. I think there are times where you might have, just made a story like a little note or something, and now you say, hey, if we can get 5 paragraphs out of this, let's post it online because I think people will read it,
right.
And it deserves its own headline, and maybe a few more people will notice it. I think that's kind of fair game at this point, but that's different than just like throwing something out there that we know not to be true, or sensationalizing something just to try to get clicks. I hope we don't get to. I hope we don't ever get to that.
Right. And I know you're a busy man, so I'll get you out of here with one more question. It's kind of asking someone successful who's been there and done that, to a young person, whether they're interested in getting into the sports world or they're already on their way. Any words of advice or tips you would say to a young buck, whether they want to be a writer, a sports broadcaster, a personality, etc., in this new day and age?
Boy, it's it's hard for me to encourage somebody to be a sports writer at this point because I don't know where you end up doing it. Staffs keep shrinking everywhere, and that sort of thing. I would like to think that people with talent and knowledge would always have a place. Whether it's at one of the big .coms or creating their own platform or something like that. But
right.
It's always hard to do that. It seems like there's a little more, seems like more of a future in the digital world, and I haven't been smart enough to figure it out yet. But I would encourage people to look digitally, in the same sense that you are with with YouTube and that sort of thing.
Right.
And as far as writing, I think the biggest thing to do if you want to be a writer is write. There's no better training for writing than to write.
Right.
And whether you write whatever it is, write down what you did during the day, write down what you saw on TV, write down something. But I look back at some of the stuff I wrote when I was in high school and college, and it's kind of like, oh wow, did I really write that? But you do that, and it makes you, hopefully, the more you write, the better you get, and that's what I hope happened with me, and I hope it happened, and I think that's what's happened with a lot of other people as well.
It's well said. I appreciate it. I'm marinating on potentially taking to the streets of LA. I'm right by the Hollywood Walk to ask some trivia questions about the Chargers to LA, because I'm convinced no one knows anything about the team nor really cares at this point. Any tips or advice for when I hit that beast of a piece of content?
No, I think it'll find its spot. You just need that's the kind of thing that can go viral. Is people, I guess, making people like when other people look foolish. So
yeah,
there you go. I'd love for someone to even just ask him how many what record did a Charger? Who was the Charger who set a record for most touchdowns in 2006?
Right.
And how many people would know the answer to that? And even more, how many touchdowns did he score? That's a pretty basic question.
Pretty basic question.
Football fans up there have no idea.
And I am curious, since you just said you were.
That's a free one. That's a free one for me.
There you go. There you go. I appreciate that. Hey, what last line? I said last question already, but I am curious, as an old school guy, is there a different way of having the brain resonate from writing pen to pad than writing on a computer or your phone? Do you think that is a night and day craft, going the old school way versus the new school?
I don't know, only because it's been so long since I wrote pen to pad. I really haven't done it since college.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're a computer guy.
Right.
Okay.
When I was getting out of college was about the time that everybody started writing on word processors and things like that. I've always found it easier to write on a computer than to write on I mean, even like writing birthday greetings to somebody on a birthday card. To me, it's a little harder than writing on a computer. I guess I've been doing it for so long, it just comes more naturally to.
Right. Well, good to know. Thank you for that. And Jay, appreciate the time so much. Jay Posner, Twitter handle at SDUT Posner, Posner, the sports editor of the sports section of the San Diego Union Tribune. And be sure to check out SanDiegoUnionTribune.com. Incredible substance on there. Great talent, great pieces. And appreciate the time, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. Good luck.
All right. Thank you.